The last time Johann Wolfgang von Goethe stood before the Cathedral of Strasbourg in 1770, he wept. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sensation he could barely articulate. A feeling of being utterly consumed by something greater than himself. The Gothic spires seemed to pierce not just the sky, but his very soul. He later wrote that he felt himself dissolving into the infinite, that his individual existence became meaningless in the face of such grandeur. This wasn't poetry, this wasn't metaphor. This was awe in its purest, most terrifying form. Today we can stand before that same cathedral, snap a photo in 3 seconds, check if it's Instagram worthy, and move on to find lunch. The building hasn't changed. We have. In 1968, sociologist Philip Rieff published a book that sent shockwaves through academic circles. He argued that Western civilization had become the first culture in human history to successfully destroy its own sense of the sacred. Not replace it, not transform it, destroy it. At the time, many dismissed him as alarmist. 56 years later, the data is terrifying. In 2023, the Pew Research Center found that 28% of Americans now identify as religiously unaffiliated, up from just 16% in 2007. But here's what's truly startling. When researchers asked these people if they ever experienced moments of profound awe or connection to something greater than themselves, the number dropped to 11%. We're not just leaving churches, we're losing the capacity to feel what churches were built to evoke. But let's go back further, much further. In 1879, anthropologist James Frazer began documenting something extraordinary. Across every continent, in cultures that had never contacted each other, he found the same behavioral pattern. When humans encountered certain places, objects, or moments, they would stop. They would become silent. Many would tremble. Some would refuse to look directly at what was before them. Australian Aboriginal peoples had sacred sites they wouldn't approach without ritual preparation. Polynesian cultures had places so tapu, so charged with sacred power, that merely walking on them could, they believed, cause death. The ancient Greeks had temenos, sacred precincts where ordinary rules ceased to apply. Medieval Christians spoke of mysterium tremendum, the mystery that causes trembling. These weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated responses to a specific neurological and emotional state. Psychologist Dasher Keltner at UC Berkeley has spent 20 years studying awe using fMRI brain scans. What he's discovered is remarkable. When humans experience genuine awe, the default mode network, the part of our brain responsible for self-referential thinking, for our sense of being a separate individual, actually shuts down. Blood flow to this region drops dramatically. In those moments, subjects report feeling their sense of self dissolving, of boundaries between themselves and the world becoming permeable. They use words like vast, immense, infinite. They struggle to articulate what happened. This is what Goethe felt. This is what the cathedral was designed to trigger, and this is what we've systematically engineered out of modern existence. Consider this fact. In 1900, the average person living in a major American city would encounter approximately 400 advertisements per day. By 1970, that number had risen to 1,600. Today, estimates range from 6,000 to 10,000. But here's what's crucial. Advertising doesn't just sell products, it trains our attention. Every advertisement is essentially a miniature lesson in rapid assessment, quick judgment, and immediate categorization. Is this useful to me? No? Move on. Next, next, next. In 2004, Microsoft Research conducted a study that found the average human attention span was 12 seconds. By 2015, it had dropped to 8.25 seconds. A goldfish, for comparison, is 9 seconds. We became literally less capable of sustained attention than a goldfish. But awe requires duration. It requires what philosopher Simone Weil called absolute unmixed attention. You cannot experience awe while scrolling. The writer David Foster Wallace gave a now famous commencement speech in 2005 where he told a parable. Two young fish are swimming along when an older fish passes them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The two young fish swim on for a bit. Then one looks at the other and asks, "What the hell is water?" Wallace's point was that the most obvious important realities are often the hardest to see and talk about. But there's a deeper issue. We've created an environment where we can't even recognize water anymore. In 1967, the average American spent 3 hours per day in what sociologist Ray Oldenburg called third places, spaces that weren't home or work: coffee shops, parks, town squares, churches, community centers. Places where you might encounter strangers, where the unexpected could happen, where the rhythms of life weren't entirely under your control. By 2019, that number had dropped to 37 minutes, and most of that was time spent waiting, not engaging. We've constructed lives of almost perfect predictability. Awe, by definition, is the experience of encountering something that violates your existing mental models of how the world works. It's what happens when reality exceeds your categories. But what happens when you've designed a life where nothing unexpected can reach you? Where algorithms predict your desires before you feel them? Where GPS ensures you never get lost? Where noise-canceling headphones block out the chaos of the world? Here's a detail that haunts me. In 2018, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania analyzed Instagram posts with over 30 million photos taken at famous landmarks and natural wonders. The Grand Canyon, the Taj Mahal, the Northern Lights. They used facial recognition software to analyze the expressions of people in selfies taken at these locations. The most common expression? Neutral, not smiling, not amazed. Neutral. The second most common? What they classified as performative joy. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes, expressions held just long enough for the photo, then immediately dropped. We've turned awe into content. But let me take you somewhere specific. The Lascaux Caves in southwestern France. In 1940, four teenagers stumbled into a cavern and found themselves surrounded by paintings made 17,000 years ago. Bulls, horses, and mysterious symbols covered every surface, rendered with shocking sophistication. Here's what gets me. The main chamber requires crawling through a narrow passage for nearly 100 meters in complete darkness. The artists who created these paintings had to work by flickering torchlight in spaces so cramped they could barely move, separated from safety by hundreds of feet of claustrophobic tunnel. Why? Why would anyone endure this? Anthropologist David Lewis Williams argues that these caves were specifically designed to induce altered states of consciousness. The darkness, the confined spaces, the oxygen deprivation from burning torches, the echo of chanting off stone walls, all of it was engineered to break down normal perception. The paintings weren't meant to be seen the way we see them now, with electric lights and tour groups. They were meant to be glimpsed in flashes, emerging and receding in torchlight, creating the impression that the animals were moving, breathing, alive in the rock. These weren't galleries, they were machines for producing awe. Now, where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how this idea of the sacred, or its loss, resonates across different places and time zones. The medieval cathedral builders understood this technology too. Chartres Cathedral, completed in 1220, was designed with acoustic principles that create a reverberation time of nearly 6 seconds. A single sung note would echo and overlap with itself, creating harmonies that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The famous blue-stained glass windows aren't just beautiful, they're calibrated to a specific wavelength of light that appears to glow from within rather than being illuminated from outside. Visitors consistently report that the blue seems to float in space, unconnected to the glass itself. This wasn't accident, this was engineering. On June 10, 1194, a fire destroyed most of the previous structure. People came from hundreds of miles away, many of them peasants who could barely feed their families, and donated labor and resources to rebuild. Why? Because the cathedral wasn't a building, it was a portal. It was where heaven touched earth. It was where they could feel the presence of something they couldn't feel anywhere else. What do we build now? In 2019, the world's largest building by footprint was completed. It's the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada, covering 5.3 million square feet. It's certainly impressive. But when was the last time you heard of someone weeping at its grandeur? When did anyone describe feeling their sense of self dissolve while touring an Amazon fulfillment center? We build for efficiency now, for productivity, for convenience. These are not values that generate awe. Let me tell you about an experiment conducted in 2015 by psychologists at UC Irvine. They took two groups of students and had them watch nature videos. One group watched in silence. The other group was allowed to check their phones, respond to messages, and browse the internet while watching. Afterward, they showed both groups images designed to elicit awe: the Milky Way, massive waterfalls, vast canyons. The group that had been allowed to multitask showed almost no physiological response. Their heart rate didn't change. Their pupils didn't dilate. When asked to describe what they saw, they struggled. Many couldn't remember specific images just minutes later. The control group, the ones who had watched in uninterrupted silence, showed significant responses: elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, detailed memories. More importantly, when asked afterward if they would volunteer time to help a stranger, the silent viewing group volunteered an average of 43 minutes. The multitasking group, 8 minutes. Awe, it turns out, doesn't just make us feel good. It makes us more generous, more patient, less narcissistic. When your sense of self diminishes, your sense of connection to others expands. This isn't mysticism. This is measurable neuroscience. In 2004, sociologist Robert Putnam published Bowling Alone, documenting the collapse of American community life. But buried in the data was something strange. People who reported experiencing awe at least once a month, whether through nature, art, music, or spiritual practice, were 37% more likely to volunteer, 42% more likely to donate to charity, and significantly less likely to report feelings of depression and anxiety. The experience of awe was one of the strongest predictors of prosocial behavior researchers had ever found. So what happened? How did we lose this? Part of the answer is speed. In 1850, the fastest a human could travel was about 30 miles per hour by train. Your relationship to landscape was necessarily intimate. You watched it unfold. You experienced duration. By 1950, commercial jets moved at 500 miles per hour. Today, we can stream live video from the International Space Station, traveling at 17,500 miles per hour. There is no landscape anymore. There is only information. But there's something deeper. Something that happened in our conception of knowledge itself. In 1620, Francis Bacon published Novum Organum, laying out the principles of the scientific method. His famous phrase was, "Knowledge is power." Nature, he argued, must be put to the question, tortured if necessary, to yield her secrets. The goal was mastery, control. The scientist stood outside nature, observing it, dissecting it, measuring it. This was revolutionary. This gave us medicine, technology, and material abundance beyond anything previous generations could imagine. But it also taught us that understanding something meant standing apart from it. That knowledge required distance. That to know the forest, you must cut down the trees and count their rings. You cannot be in awe of something you're dissecting. Here's a specific moment that captures this shift. In 1968, Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Astronaut William Anders took a photograph called Earthrise, the image of Earth, a blue marble rising over the lunar horizon. It's been called the most influential environmental photograph ever taken. It sparked the modern environmental movement. But Anders himself later said something chilling in an interview. "We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth." And then he added, "But after a while, it's just another place. You get used to it. You get used to it." Those 4 words might explain everything. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. We adapt to our circumstances, no matter how extraordinary. Lottery winners return to baseline happiness within a year. People living in stunning natural beauty stop seeing it after a few months. The miracle becomes mundane. But previous cultures knew this. They built practices specifically designed to counteract adaptation. The Jewish Sabbath, for instance, isn't just about rest. It's about intentional discontinuity. For 24 hours, you stop producing, stop consuming, stop striving. You create a gap in the routine. The prohibition against kindling fire wasn't about fire. It was about breaking the pattern of control and manipulation that defined the other 6 days. Islamic prayer 5 times daily, always at different hours as the sun moves, always requiring physical prostration. This isn't just devotion, it's interruption. It's a practice that says, whatever you're doing, whatever seems important, stop, reorient, remember what's actually vast. We've lost the technology of interruption. In 2017, former Google employee Tristan Harris testified before the Senate about persuasive technology. He explained how platforms are designed to be addictive, to colonize every moment of potential boredom or reflection. But here's what he didn't say. Boredom is where awe begins. Every mystical tradition in human history involves some form of sensory deprivation, of stripping away stimulation until the mind becomes quiet enough to notice what's actually there. Desert Fathers in early Christianity would spend years in caves with almost no external input. Buddhist monks sit facing blank walls. Indigenous Vision Quest required days alone in wilderness without food. These aren't punishments. They're technologies for restoring the capacity for awe. What's the opposite of that? In 2019, researchers found that the average American checks their phone 96 times per day. That's once every 10 minutes during waking hours. We've made sustained attention, the prerequisite for awe, almost impossible. But here's where it gets truly strange. We're not happier. By every measure, despite unprecedented material comfort, despite technology that would seem like magic to our ancestors, despite unlimited access to entertainment and information, we're miserable. In 1960, clinical depression affected approximately 4% of the American population. By 2020, that number was 21%. Anxiety disorders went from 6% to 31%, and these numbers accelerated dramatically after 2007. What happened in 2007, the iPhone? Now, correlation isn't causation, but consider this. In the same period, reported experiences of what psychologists call self-transcendent emotions, awe, wonder, reverence, spiritual connection, dropped by more than half. We traded the infinite for the immediate. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt describes humans as having two modes of being. The ordinary, where we're focused on our needs, our goals, our separate self. And the transcendent, where those boundaries dissolve and we feel part of something larger. He argues that humans are designed to move between these states. We need both. The ordinary for survival, the transcendent for meaning. But we've built a civilization that operates almost entirely in the ordinary mode. A world where everything is measured, optimized, and monetized. Where there are no longer any spaces that exist outside the logic of utility and exchange. Here's a fact that breaks my heart. In 2022, a study found that 73% of Americans under 30 had never experienced what they would describe as genuine awe. Not once. They could describe things as cool or impressive, but that's not awe. Awe involves overwhelm. It involves the collapse of your normal frameworks. These young people had never felt their self-concept shatter in the face of something too vast to comprehend. What does that do to a person, to a society? The novelist David Foster Wallace, shortly before his death, said this: "Worship is natural to human beings. Everybody worships something. The only choice we get is what to worship. If you worship money and things, you will never have enough. If you worship your body and beauty, you will always feel ugly. Worship power, and you will feel weak and afraid. These things are real, but they will eat you alive." And then he said, The compelling reason for choosing some sort of god to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. He wasn't talking about religion specifically. He was talking about the human need to orient towards something transcendent, something that puts our small concerns into perspective. Without that, we become consumed by those small concerns. They expand to fill our entire horizon. Look at what we worship now. In 2023, Americans spent an average of 7 hours per day on screens. 7 hours. That's more time than we spend sleeping, more than we spend with other humans in person. And what are we doing during those hours? Mostly we're worshiping ourselves, our feeds, our metrics, our performance of identity. Social media promised connection, but it delivered something else: perpetual self-consciousness. The medieval peasant never worried about how they looked from outside because there was no outside. They existed in community, embedded in relationships and roles. They might have felt many things: hunger, cold, fear, but not the peculiar modern anxiety of being constantly observed and evaluated. Now we curate ourselves. We manage our brand. We exist in a state of permanent performance. And you cannot experience awe while performing. Awe requires surrender. It requires the dropping of your guard, your masks, your carefully constructed self. It requires vulnerability to something beyond your control. When was the last time you let yourself be vulnerable to the world? Let me tell you about a study done at the Grand Canyon. Researchers observed visitors at different viewpoints. They found that the average time spent actually looking at the canyon, not through a camera, not through a phone, but with naked eyes, was 17 seconds. 17 seconds facing one of the most vast and ancient landscapes on Earth. Then they moved on. They'd gotten their photo. They'd checked the box. They'd captured it. But here's what capture means: to take prisoner, to contain, to control. The Latin root is capere, to seize. We don't experience the Grand Canyon anymore. We seize it. We reduce it to data we can store and share. We've confused having an image of something with having experienced it. Indigenous peoples who lived near the Grand Canyon for thousands of years had a different relationship. Many tribes considered it a sacred place where the dead journeyed to the afterlife. They wouldn't approach certain areas. They had rituals for how to encounter it. Not because they were primitive, but because they understood something we've forgotten. Some things shouldn't be domesticated. Some experiences should overwhelm you. The Hopi have a word, koyaniskatsi, that roughly translates as white life out of balance. It describes a state where humans have become so separated from natural rhythms that we've lost our sanity. The word gained fame from a 1982 film that showed modern life in time-lapse. Highways, factories, crowds, everything moving too fast, everything disconnected from earth and sky and season. That was 40 years ago. It's exponentially worse now. But here's what gives me hope. The capacity for awe isn't gone. It's latent. It's covered over but not destroyed. In 2020, during the pandemic lockdowns, something unexpected happened. With planes grounded, with traffic disappeared, with cities gone quiet, people started noticing things. They noticed stars they'd never seen through the light pollution. They noticed birdsong they'd never heard over the traffic noise. They noticed the passage of seasons, the daily movement of light, the smell of rain. And for a brief moment, awe came flooding back. People posted videos of empty streets at dawn, lit gold by the rising sun. They shared photos of their first time really seeing the night sky from their backyard. They talked about feeling connected to something larger than themselves for the first time in years. It didn't last. As soon as things reopened, we rushed back to the old patterns, but for a moment we remembered. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, wrote something profound. He said that even in the camps, even in the absolute worst conditions humans have created, people could still experience moments of transcendent beauty. He described watching the sunset through the barracks window, seeing how the light transformed the muddy yard into something almost holy, and feeling, just for a moment, that life had meaning beyond survival. His point was this: the capacity for awe, for finding meaning in beauty, for connecting to something transcendent. This is ineradicable from human nature. You can bury it. You can ignore it. You can build entire civilizations that suppress it, but you cannot destroy it. So what do we do? If you found value in this exploration, if this channel helps you see the world differently, consider supporting it with a super thanks. It genuinely helps us keep making this kind of content. The answer isn't to go back. We can't uninvent technology. We can't return to medieval Christianity or tribal animism. We wouldn't want to, even if we could. But we can recognize what we've lost and make intentional choices to recover it. Some of those choices are simple. Put your phone in another room for an hour. Go outside without headphones. Sit with a tree. Watch the full arc of a sunset from first color to full dark. Let yourself be bored. Let yourself encounter something without immediately trying to capture it or share it or move past it. Some choices are harder. Question the values that shape your life. Ask yourself what you're actually worshiping in Wallace's sense. Ask whether the goals you're pursuing will satisfy anything deep in you, or whether they'll just generate new wants, new insufficiencies, new reasons to feel inadequate. Start noticing what interrupts your ordinary consciousness. What makes you stop? What makes you forget yourself? For some people, it's music. For others, it's mathematics. For others, it's children, or cooking, or the ocean. Whatever it is, seek it out. Prioritize it. Build your life around it rather than relegating it to when I have time. And perhaps most importantly, recognize that you are participating in a great forgetting, but also potentially in a great remembering. You are living through the moment when a civilization might lose the sacred entirely, or might rediscover it in new forms. There are people working on this, psychologists researching awe, architects designing spaces that induce wonder, educators teaching contemplative practices, musicians creating experiences of collective transcendence, urban planners preserving dark sky areas where people can still see the Milky Way. They're trying to build the cathedrals of the 21st century, not stone buildings, but practices and spaces and moments that restore our capacity for self-transcendence. You can be part of that. Or you can let the default patterns pull you back into the endless scroll, the perpetual distraction, the life of perfect control and zero awe. The philosopher Albert Borgman distinguishes between devices and focal practices. Devices are technologies that give us convenient ends while hiding the means. Focal practices are activities that keep us engaged with both process and product, that require skill and attention that cannot be optimized away. Playing an instrument instead of streaming music, cooking a meal instead of ordering delivery, walking in a forest instead of watching nature videos. Focal practices are slower, they're less efficient, but they preserve something essential: the possibility of genuine encounter, the possibility that something might surprise you, challenge you, overwhelm you. The death of awe isn't inevitable. It's a choice we're making, collectively and individually, every day. We can make different choices. I think of Goethe at that cathedral, weeping at the beauty of what humans could create when they oriented towards something beyond themselves. I think of the people who spent decades building it, knowing they would never see it completed, working for a future they would never inhabit. What are we building for? What future are we creating? And what will the people of that future feel when they encounter the monuments of our age? Will they feel awe? Or will they feel the same neutral expression captured in those Instagram photos? The look of someone who's seen everything and felt nothing. The answer depends on what we do next, on whether we can recover the capacity to be overwhelmed, to be shattered, to encounter something so vast that our small self-concerns fall away, and we're left breathless, speechless, transformed. The sacred isn't dead, but it's dying, and only we can revive it. Not through beliefs or doctrines, but through attention, through presence, through the willingness to be vulnerable to wonder. So I'll leave you with this. What was the last thing that truly stopped you in your tracks? That made you forget yourself? That touched something in you deeper than preference or opinion? If you can't remember, it's time to start looking. This is Professor Archive. Until next time, stay curious, stay present. and let yourself be amazed.